So I'd like to welcome each of you to today's Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, where we're taking up the topic of rediscovering America. I'd like to begin by introducing my husband, Cliff Tillotson. He is quite an avid student of American history, in addition to being a political science major at UC Santa Barbara, where he and I actually both graduated from. And he has spent time in the nation's capital. He's also spent time in New York, where he was particularly inspired by a trip to the Statue of Liberty. So I'd like to hand it over now to Cliff for Rediscovering America.
I found the topic to be difficult for me. I thought I could put my head around it or my arms around it, but I struggled with it. And so I'm really looking forward to all of your thoughts on what it means to rediscover America. So first off, you know, the title implies that there once existed America. There was America that was found, and then it got lost, and now we need to find it again. And so I don't know about that, if we really ever had this America that we've lost. I was thinking, is America a place that is on the planet that was found by Columbus and his contemporary, where we get the name America? Amerigo Vespucci, who is from Florence, that's where we get the name America. The cartographers changed his name from Amerigo to America because they felt that all big land masses should have feminine names, like Asia, Europa, China, Australia, Antarctica, Canada. So they said, okay, we're going to call it America. But that's not really what America is, not just a place. Or is it the people that live on that place? Or is it all the cultures that have come here into this melting pot that we call America? You know, or is it some kind of whole that's greater than the sum of all of its parts? And what would that whole be? JFK said once that, John F. Kennedy said once that except for the indigenous, we are all immigrants or the descendants of immigrants. Sometimes we forget that we're all immigrants or descendants of immigrants. So for me, America is kind of like an onion with many, many different layers to it. You peel back one layer and then there's another America inside of it. It's kind of like this doll that our granddaughter plays with when she comes to our house, this Russian babushka doll that just keeps opening up, and there's more and more dolls inside of it. That's, to me, that's what America is. So for me, America is a place of constant and ever deepening discovery. But there is this one sentence that I think captures the essence of America and its experiment and project of democracy. And our democracy is the longest surviving democracy in the modern world. And it's the beginning of the Declaration of Independence, where Thomas Jefferson says that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I would argue that it's the ideals expressed in this one sentence which make up the foundation stone outside time and space that America is built upon and ever striving towards. However, from its inception, America has always had this tense interplay between darkness and light. The idealism of equality that it speaks of in the Declaration of Independence, and the hypocrisy of slavery that we had at that time, and we still have tremendous racism in our country. We have this courage to hope and to aspire, and yet we also have all these shadows of fear and doubt. We have the sense of the common good, but the strong sense of individualism that are always clashing with each other. We're striving for a more perfect union, and we're trying to hold on to the status quo at the same time. Sometimes, more than others, I think we Americans can more clearly sense the way forward, and that we do indeed live on a shining city on a hill, to borrow Ronald Reagan's phrase. But other times we find ourselves face down, disoriented, and disheartened in the gutter, not knowing what's up from down or forwards from backwards. So I think right now, my feeling is that America is kind of lost. We individually and collectively are at a crossroads, not knowing really what our place is in the world and what our purpose and what the purpose is of America. And so therefore our relationship with the rest of the world has toggled between self-absorbed isolationism on the one hand, and military intervention and political and cultural imposition on the other. Things go bad in the world when we don't get involved, and things go bad when we do get involved. But even for all of its ugliness, the rest of the world still looks to America for inspiration and navigational support. In fact, France gave us the Statue of Liberty, not for us to enjoy and to view for ourselves, but to remind us what the foundation is of idealism that we were built upon. So with climate change that we have upon us now, with the rise of authoritarianism, the massive disparity of wealth in the world, the pandemic that we're experiencing right now, and the current refugee crisis throughout the world that's because of those other causes, America urgently needs to rediscover and reinvent itself. America needs to trash its false notions of exceptionalism and begin the hard work of envisioning its appropriate place in the world's civilization of tomorrow, where the human race lives sustainably in harmony with nature and in solidarity with itself, where all countries are so interconnected and interdependent that disagreements are settled with respectful diplomacy and fair negotiation instead of war, where the metrics for human progress and human happiness are not found in materialism and consumerism, but in sharing and service. So I think, to me, the essence of what America's idealism was best expressed in the poem by Emma Lazarus that you can find at the base of the Statue of Liberty. And I just like to recite it in closing. It's just a beautiful, beautiful poem to me. So it goes like this: not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed, sunlit gate shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep, ancient land, your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. So there's just a few thoughts to kind of hopefully, prime the pump of all the rest of your guys' ideas on what it means to rediscover America.
Thank you so much, Cliff. I'm wondering if you were to tell a story to a young person about the America that you thought of when you were a young person, how would you describe it? Or at least the America that you would like it to be, so let's say, that you dreamed it to be. How would you describe that?
I think maybe Irving Berlin described it the best in his song, America the Beautiful. He wrote that song, I think at the end of World War I, was that right, Maurice? Or somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And he wrote it as a song of gratitude, that we have been given something through a tremendous sacrifice. As I've read a lot about founding fathers and the sacrifice that all of them did, so much sacrifice to make this country come into being. So that gratitude for all that sacrifice in that song, and to this beautiful country that we live in. I mean, it's just got so much just wonderful places in it that we all get to enjoy and so forth. So I think maybe that song would be what I would have a child listen to get some sense of what America, kind of its essence is to me, I guess, something like that.
Yeah. And I wonder maybe also, how about some Walt Whitman?
Walt Whitman, Studs Terkel too. There's something about the common man and the common sense of the common man that we trust that each of us in this country can be guided by their own kind of navigational star of common sense that Tom Paine wrote about, that guided all those during the Revolutionary War in his amazing pamphlet, Common Sense. But Walt Whitman, in A Song of Myself, in his ability to identify with every single person in that poem as if they were an extension of himself. That's a good example. Walt Whitman, I think he's in some ways also the poet of America. And Thoreau, I see this shirt with Thoreau. Thoreau definitely was a strong voice for the idealism of America, as well as a very critical voice of when America would deviate from its proper path, I think.
And what do you appreciate about Studs Terkel?
And it's kind of it's just an honoring of the blue collar common man that's done so much to, with their hands to build America. But I would really like to hear what other people think it means to rediscover America. I was just trying to kind of get it going.
Well, what I appreciate about what you've done, Cliff, is something that always amazes me about Hindus, is that they are very devoted to their faith, and they are also completely at liberty, I've noticed, to even, take Krishna to task. So if we really love this country of America, we should be able to take it to task, because we expect the better and higher of it. So thank you really for that very much. Bob?
It struck me when you talked about Hinduism. I used to teach philosophy of history of religions. And, you have monotheism, polytheism, dualism. But in Hindu, you have what's called henotheism. So if you focus on Shiva, Shiva is the one true God. But if you focus on Krishna, Krishna is the one true God. And there are thousands of one true gods, and they're all what you are focusing on. And it struck me, when Clifton was talking about America, that America, there's almost two sides to America. Almost anything you can say. I mean, that critical voice of Thoreau is contrasted to, the equality of all men, this ideal that's there. It's individualism, and it struck me even with something like America the Beautiful. God shed his grace on thee. And Woody Guthrie hated that song because he said, this land is our land. This land belongs to you and me, and we've got to do it. And he goes from the West Coast to the East Coast and all the way across, but not with this idea that it was given to us by God. It's a tricky kind of thing, because when Reagan talks about that shining city on the hill, that goes all the way back to Jonathan Edwards and the Bible, the shining city on the hill. We are the example given by God to the rest of the world. That is ego. You know, and it's exceptionalism. We are the one true democracy. We are the one that everyone should be looking to. And that energy can lead to some pretty amazing episodes in history. We don't tend to question ourselves. And so it's that's part of it as well. When I was thinking of this topic, I was thinking of what's happening today as something that's a deep core of American history of, we don't like intellectuals. We don't like elites. We don't like to be told what it is because we know it already. And that tension is just always there. Right now it's 50-50. But that's what I was kind of thinking of, is that America has this kind of almost Jekyll and Hyde duality to itself, that the ideals go all the way back, but so does the exceptionalism, so does the individualism, so does the I'm right and I don't have to be told what to do. I don't know, it's very scattered, but I could see that in what you were saying, that there was this other side.
I totally agree with you, Bob. And I think we're both in the same kind of conundrum of how to express it. But I 100% agree with you. We have a big problem with this exceptionalism notion.
Well, our quote for this week from the Still and Moving Almanac, right? A new republic of conscience will take its place in the community of mankind, which will come of age and declare itself as one family. Hermes. Now, that's the lead quote for the week in the almanac. And it does seem that it just so happened that, I guess, in Philadelphia is when a country was born on metaphysical principles, not on nationality or religion or all the other bases for tribes and nations. That doesn't mean we have to have an ego trip about it, but it does mean that was formed on these principles. And that's what seems to me we need to rediscover. What is it that we need to rediscover? Well, yes, we have to shed our egotism, that's for sure, but we also need to rediscover something, according to our theme, right? And I think it's kind of rediscovering what those principles, especially, the first line of the Declaration of Independence, that all these truths are self-evident and we're endowed with inalienable rights to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness, not just happiness, but the pursuit. And so it seems to me that that's kind of, in order to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you do have to crown thy good with brotherhood. Because how do you pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? By yourself? That's egotism. But if you're, so you really need to go from your ethical individualism and take a look at what can we do with each other. And maybe where we've gone wrong, as Thomas Paine might indicate, is we have too much reliance on institutions to save us. Institutions are going to save us from everything, from a pandemic to everything else. It's all the responsibility we're going to project into institutions, both private and public, corporations and government. And going back to the notion of common sense and the common man, it seems to me we can begin to start if we take these ideals and make them real. And if we take these ideals and we have them in our heart and we go out and work with other people with brotherhood, that we can solve different problems on a micro perspective. We don't need to change the world. All we need to do is exemplify ideals like universal brotherhood, like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, allowing tolerance and civility for others to do the same. But we have to practice the ideals. And I think after 200 years, we don't practice the ideals. And the point to reinforce my thesis, if you want to call it that, was pointed out in another Zoom today. And that is that if you ask most Congress people, when they do take that oath of office, most Congress people do think that they're pursuing these ideals or these principles. Yet, of course, we know they act in a different way. Why? It's because in order to enact these high principles, you need the first step that Gandhi pointed out, which is fearlessness. And if you don't have fearlessness, which is the beginning of the godlike quality in human beings, fearlessness, then you won't be able to stand up for principle, because whether it's money or getting reelected or da 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 da, well, you could list a whole bunch of things, they're going to sweep you away. So we have to go back to not only rediscovering principles, but in doing so, we have to be able to give our heart to them so we can act in fearless ways. And Congress has not acted, in my mind, it's my opinion, of course, in fearless ways.
You know, it seems like the heart of what you were saying is really a democracy, you know, brotherhood, that we are working democratically. You know, the Constitution says we, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, you know, we go about doing that, and our institutions are what we have. Every congressman takes an oath to the Constitution, which is a very idealistic document and also a very flawed document. And it was interesting. I just finished reading a book called Justice Deferred, Race and the Supreme Court. And what I learned was that from 1954 to 1968, which was the period when I was growing up, was when the Supreme Court constantly worked towards civil rights. And in a sense, I think what you were calling brotherhood, of really respecting other people's rights, endowing them with certain kinds of principles and dignity. And that decade of the Supreme Court is almost exceptional. From the rest of the history, from before the Constitution all the way to today, it was always interpreting it in the most narrow possible way. How many rights do you have? Well, all it really means is slavery. It doesn't talk about brotherhood, it's just slavery. And so we can discriminate against you as long as we don't enslave you. That narrow reading. And that's the rest of the, you know, almost 200 years of history of that institution. There's this edge of idealism, and yet very narrow, very ungenerous. And what you're talking about, unfearless. I mean, not fearless at all. Only occasionally do they stand up. More Dred Scott than Brown versus Education. And right after Brown versus Education, taking away. We have the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment giving people freedom, and taking away. So I love the idea of this fearlessness and brotherhood, but, you know, that's where I look for, you know, where are our stories that show that? And I think they're there, but they're, you know, every once in a while in the speeches of Lincoln or maybe others, we can feel that. But that energy is, it's rare in American history, and it's really rare right now.
My only comment is that I agree with you. There is systematic racism, the original sin, and et cetera, et cetera. But remember, the news media and even academics, for that matter, that doesn't really tell the story of the real America, you know, and it feeds off itself. So there have been horrendous things that have happened, and we should know about them. Yes, you know, and in fact, it's our very system of government that allows us to know about them. In China, you wouldn't know about them, right? Tiananmen Square, you wouldn't know about them. But I think there's a lot of cooperation that goes on between human beings, and that if you notice what you mentioned, most of it happened to be with an institution. a powerful one, the Supreme Court. But it's not institutions that make things. It's people getting together, like Thomas Paine said. And we have to learn to just work together as people. And a lot of times we actually do work together as people. So it's a very challenging problem. But of course, anytime you have high ideals, you have high challenges, you know. But as one person said, if the ideals are looked at as a horizon, we need to keep the horizon in focus. And we need to rediscover the horizon. So if you get off course, if you're on a boat, not that I know anything about boating, I'll leave that up to some of you all, but you got to get back to having a sense of the horizon. And I think, and cherishing it, but also the challenge of how to put it into practice. But it can be put in a real micro application of what tomorrow are you going to do to exemplify a little bit of brotherhood, a little bit of loving kindness to people, however you want to put it, right? But it's how do we keep that consciously in our mind? Because that's how, as was put in a book that some of this quote came from, I think, that's how we earn the community of the future. It's not going to come to us, like you say, God's just not going to give it to us, right? We have to earn it. And so we've been given these ideals and we constantly have to self-correct. And democracy itself is a mechanism, if it works well, for self-correction. Even elections are a way of self-correcting. But it has gotten really polluted and corrupted. And so I guess the challenge, and it's a real challenge, is how do you not, on one hand, you can become very attached to democracy, but you can't be totally attached to the forms because they've been corrupted. So at some point, the forms might have to go and there might be more chaos or something, I don't know. So that's really a challenge for me anyway. It hurts my heart to think about it. I taught public administration for most of my life. So whatever I've been teaching is disintegrating because we're going to a loyalty system, not a merit system, among other things. So it's a challenge. But again, what are we rediscovering? We're rediscovering how to instantiate these ideas that we cherish individually, that gives us our freedom to pursue happiness.
It's kind of beautiful because, I mean, I was reading an autobiography of Frederick Douglass, and of course he starts out as a slave, but you know, at every moment he goes back to, we've lost our ideals, we've got to keep going. He's a very positive person. Martin Luther King, you know, is very positive. He says, you know, the Bible is there for us to learn from, and we can keep getting better. I mean, I have a dream, you know, the mountaintop, and something has to be there to inspire all those people that still have that hope for America, like Douglas and Lincoln and Thoreau to some extent, even in a different kind of way. But maybe that's it. What you were describing is what gives that kind of hope. And in other countries, that hope is squashed, like Tiananmen Square, as you said.
Cliff, I did want to ask kind of the group as a whole, and then maybe come back to you. There's been quite a few references to courage. And it seems to me that when we look at a micro level, and then we look even at a larger level, there have been a number of demonstrations of courage amongst people, amongst individuals in the last several years. And I wonder if anybody else is seeing what I'm seeing. I am seeing courage. And that's the standing up for ideals in the ones I'm seeing.
I think I'll take this one. I actually have to go in a minute. I thought this was going to be a meditation class. I didn't read the full description. So I'm so sorry. But I'm so happy to be here and hear this conversation. I have a podcast called See One Beautiful Soul. So this kind of conversation is right up my alley. I think hasn't necessarily been touched on to me so far in this conversation is, and maybe I wasn't listening properly, I want to say that, to me, one of the beauties of this country is freedom of religion. I think that I'm Jewish, so I grew up here in Florida when it was actually very anti-Semitic. And it's hard to believe that Florida could be anti-Semitic, but it was when I was growing up. One of my teachers told me that I killed Jesus as a kid. So I was like, what? Was that the kid on the bus? I didn't even know that so I didn't mean to push him. Did I kill him? And so, I think that growing up as a Jewish person in this country in the 80s, I had to sort of like fight my way through certain battles. And as I got older and people became, I guess, more awakened around me, I think it's so beautiful that we're living in a place where a lot of the time, our grandparents or great grandparents fought for separation between church and state. And to me, one of the hardships is seeing this like deterioration of church, because I think it's really beautiful to have religious ideals and to be able to have them. So, I do see that like the country seems a little split, but I think it's splitting and splintering off within those two groups as well. And there's just so much division right now. And I see what's happening right now as sort of like a war between the spirit and us. And I get that there's an idea that like we are the only democracy and exceptionalism, but I also think that there is an exceptionalistic part to America after having visited 20 countries. And I've only visited 20, and I know there's a lot more than that. But I've been to the Middle East for several years, and I've been to India, and I've been all over Asia, South Africa. And, it's hard when you're on the ground to say that many other countries have gotten this freedom of religion right. I know that they do exist, but there's just something really special about this country in that way. And I feel like we're losing that part. So sorry I went on a bit long, but my podcast is all about seeing all of us as connected souls, not just the part animal that we are. And if I knew that even if I looked the wrong way at some guy across the street who was in no way related to me, but related by soul because we're all connected, would I think twice about it, and I think to me that's living in a spiritual plane. So I don't know, I'm just trying to encourage people nowadays to, instead of like being so hard and fast to your political beliefs, like asking people, what are your spiritual beliefs? Like, where are you right now spiritually, and how could that affect your country? So I'll end with that. Thanks for listening.
That was such a beautiful contribution. Thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you.
I love that Maurice has pointed out that the principles were not religious principles, but they were metaphysical principles. And I think in the evolution, because people who haven't elevated their consciousness yet to the point of being able to understand metaphysics as separate from a religion, they had to put it in language that people could understand. And it sounds religious, but it really is metaphysical. I think it's a distinction that I appreciate you bringing that up, Maurice. And I love what Barbara just said about how the country has gone into this political. We saw how the pandemic, once it turned into a political issue, people just shut their minds off. They weren't even logically thinking about what they were doing. They were just simply following along like sheep. But until one has had an opening and an awakening to a higher level where they can see that we're all connected, unfortunately, I think we're, according to Ken Wilber, we're only at about 6 or 7% of the population reaching the point where they actually can see themselves as a part of a connected whole. And until we reach that tipping point, I'm afraid for the most part, it's these sheep that are running along, just following whatever sort of political BS that gets spewed at them through whatever channel that they're watching. Sorry if that was a bit of a rant.
Well, I want to talk about the courage that I've been seeing it inspires me. I get inspired by the people who have, been so courageous to come out as being gay, and making sure that the rest of us know that they are just like us and they love people, and they have, through their courage, opened us so much more opened us so much more than we used to be as a society. I love that people are coming out, saying that they have been abused, and doing this at tremendous risk to their reputation and to their psyches, and saying, this isn't right, it wasn't right for me, and it's not right for anybody else, and I have to speak out so that it stops. That's fairly new, and it's going on in huge ways, and it's having big impacts. We have people like the young Swedish girl whose last name I can't pronounce, Greta, Thunberg, who is standing up for the environment, and she's just not going to be shut up. And we just, with the Black Lives Matters, the African Americans of this country became aware of their political clout in a way that, speaking to African Americans, I've heard that they were never aware of before, and they feel as if they're responsible for the way the last presidential election went, especially followed by what happened in the state of Georgia afterwards. And there's this sense of courage that has arisen in that sector. So I feel as if when we talk about what's going on the micro level that has the ability to gather momentum and become something on a larger level, it's really possible to see instances of courage, and that gives me hope. Cliff.
Yeah, kind of along with that. One of the things I was trying to touch on in my little talk was that one of the big things that we need to do in America is change our idea of what progress is. We have a sense of progress as having to do with material progress based upon gross national product and so forth, rather than on what is real happiness. So changing the whole idea of progress to be away from materialism towards moral progress, towards spiritual progress, those kind of things, is what I think we need to do radically in order to really honestly, individually and collectively address climate change, which is the big thing that we all need to do, as a country, as a world, as each individual. And so this idea that Maurice is touching on, and Bob as well, that leadership, we shouldn't rely on governments for leadership. And I think one of your quotes is for the week is along those lines too. But leadership, I think, especially in our country, we're all challenged to be leaders in one way or another, to speak out, to have courage. You think of Greta Thunberg, Amanda Gorman, who gave that wonderful poem, Martin Luther King, Walt Whitman, Thoreau, Emerson, all these people, they weren't in office, but they were leaders. There's that quote, I think, in Proverbs, that where there is no vision, the people perish. That's what America needs right now to rediscover itself, is this forward-looking future vision of a world that's in harmony with nature and in harmony with the people of the world, in harmony with one another. And so all of us are challenged to imagine that world, and then to do everything we can, like Maurice is saying, to make that world come into being and to live in it in the here and now.
Mari is saying that as a parent can love a child, yet disapprove of some of their actions. I think it's possible to appreciate wonderful things about the country you live in, as well as see the faults and mistakes. Where does this land was made for you and me, and all men are created equal, fit with the horrendous treatment of indigenous peoples? That's a question, a comment and a question from Mari. I think it's bringing up the paradox of when we are founded upon and hold such high ideals for ourselves and for the country we live in, it becomes really evident how far we miss the mark. The dichotomy becomes glaringly obvious. The higher our ideals are, it's almost like the further we fall short of them. And I do appreciate what Barbara said about having traveled to a number of countries in the world, having now the opportunity to recognize, for example, the religious freedom that we might take for granted in this country that is not at all a given in many of the countries of this world. So it is interesting and important to remember that partly we seem to be failing because we hold such high ideals, and then partly we really are failing. Sarah?
Yeah, that question and comment. It seems like we are in this specific time where there's an awakeness to the fact that horrible things were done in the whole formation of this country. And at the same time, I know growing up in Hawaii, I never really had much of a chance at a sense of patriotism or pride for us belonging to a certain country or anything like that, given being taught the story of Hawaii and how the land was overtaken. And so it was always kind of a tainted topic. And now kind of becoming a little older, realizing that, well, that's not really the answer either, to condemn and say, kind of like if you had a bad child and you're a horrible child, that's not going to provide any progress. But really, and this conversation is wonderful to highlight the real value that's at play and that's happening, and acknowledge that it hasn't been great along the whole way, and we must progress. And that's really this stage, I think, that's more and more clear in the times we're in, that there can be hurt, there's generational hurt and pain and trauma, but we have to accept that there also is good, and we have to accept that we need to progress, and be aware of all the past and how we want to move forward. So that's the thought. Thank you all for the conversation.
This is Sandia. I'll share something. It's not full, like completely thought out, but what Sarah was just sharing got me thinking about, well, this topic is so relevant because it is Columbus Day, or Indigenous Peoples Day, on Monday. And there is a bit of a fight in our country right now, I think, about whether it should be Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples Day. I think it's kind of split, along the political divides with that. And I encourage you to check out Indigenous Peoples Day if that's new to you, and see what events might be happening in your local community where you could be an ally to support that cause. But another thing that's happening here in Southwest Colorado and really across the country is pushing back on critical race theory. And we've been seeing that in our local school districts. People really pushing back on any education that encourages a more inclusive community and society. And that's troubling to me. And I know that the people who are pushing back are feeling threatened. They're feeling like their patriotism is being threatened, that their white culture, their white identity is probably feeling threatened. And they're saying that critical race theory about diversity, equity, and inclusion is trying to rewrite the history of America, teach our kids a history that isn't true. And to me, I mean, my partner, Dylan, is a 5th grade elementary school teacher who teaches language arts and social studies. So this is coming up in his classroom. He wants to teach a history that is inclusive of all of his diverse students. Not trying to rewrite history, but tell a truer history, a fuller history. So often history is written by the conquerors, the people that win the wars. And so this is more about a history that tells everyone's story in a way that they can see themselves in the history books. They can see people who look like them in the history books. And to me, this is a little bit about rediscovering America, that it's not just told from one dominant narrative, perhaps, but it's told from multiple diverse narratives. So that's what I'll share. Or were you going to add something? You're in here all of a sudden.
I will happily jump in with that one. And I think the beauty of rediscovering America is also rediscovering the voices of kids too. Rediscovering the voices of the things and the kind of, I don't know, the experiences that make up our world. And so honoring even the youngest of those voices, to know that they have such incredible stories to tell, and they have such incredible and vivid experiences, to rediscover the voices of those that traditionally don't get to voice their opinions and their experiences. So for me, that is this beauty that we have to rediscover, is rediscovering the voices that we have traditionally not heard.
That's wonderful, Dylan. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? So would, and I agree with what's been said. And so it seems to me, but I'm asking a question because I don't know, is by allowing new voices, oppressed voices, hidden voices to be voiced, to give us a whole broader perspective, and to let people see that everyone can participate and did participate. My question is that linked with the fact that we do have some ideals about the Declaration of Independence and even our faulty Constitution? That's my question. Is it just social identity, or is it identity where you teach the children, well, we have an imperfect Constitution, we have Declaration of Independence, and that allows us to hear these voices that haven't been heard? And I guess that's a question, because I don't know if that's happening.
Yeah, Bob?
Well, I can give one example of it happening. There's a program that's a national program called National History Day, and it's in every state, so including Hawaii History Day. And in Hawaii, they also have a Hawaiian language version of History Day. And the idea of History Day is telling those stories. So it's not so much about dates and leaders and all that, but the story, and then told within the context of history in a balanced way. So the criteria include not just the story and how it maybe has never been acknowledged, but also the other side, the context, what else was going on. And that kind of, I guess, effort is an interesting way to teach. The projects I've seen have just been incredible, where they may deal with something that they see as, especially students, they have such a sense of outrage, so they can come to this, but then backing off and saying, well, I can't just say it, I have to prove it, I have to demonstrate it, I have to, give other voices, go back into the past to look at what they were saying in their own voice in the newspapers of the time, or journals, letters, and things like that. So that's an example. I mean, I see really tremendous projects coming out of History Day that do the ideal of telling stories that haven't been told before.
Yes. And I think part of what Maurice's question may have been is it built into the ideals of the country that we are able to tell these stories, for example, in a way that people in Hong Kong, who up to just a very recent time ago, a matter of months or brief years, had that kind of freedom of speech and no longer do have it. is it built into our ideals, into our institutions, that we have the opportunity for such things to happen? Not that they always do, but we have it built in. I think that's part of Maurice's question. Yeah, Cliff?
I think maybe we've really hit on something here, that maybe this is really what Rediscovering America is all about, is opening our ears up to all these diverse stories, instead of this one story, this one history of America that we were taught in school. No, there's so many voices. There's so many stories that have been muffled and hidden. There's Black historians, there's, like you're saying, the gay rights world, all these different stories. So if we can open our ears to the stories of children, to the stories of the indigenous people in our country, and enjoy that, that we're this country that's supposed to be e pluribus unum, out of the many comes the one, and celebrate all these amazing stories and the amazing diversity that we have, that in this melting pot of America. I think that's part of what Rediscovering America is finding these voices and listening to these stories.
Dylan?
Sorry, that comment just made me nod in thinking about Studs Terkel. Thinking about honoring the voices of the many, and that is just, sorry, Cliff, that comment when you were talking about Studs Terkel, it just made me remember the books that I was reading, and I can't remember exactly which one it was. I feel like it was the Studs Terkel that was talking about the oral history of the Great Depression. That beauty of hearing and honoring stories, to me, it just made me deeply just moved. But I really, really think that is, to me, the beauty of this country, is that we do have so many different stories, and then we do get to hear and experience all these different stories. I know Sunday has something that she wants to say too.
Yeah, along those lines of storytelling, I'm facilitating a couple of community forums that are happening right now in Durango, Colorado, and it's called Well-Being Amid Disruption. It's a pretty vague and kind of strange title, but it's being co-hosted by our public health department and our local college by a climate change scientist. So public health, climate change scientists. And our first forum was all about storytelling. So we used a method called Appreciative Interviews, where we paired people up, strangers. First, we did some kind of icebreaker activities so they could kind of get to know each other, and then paired up strangers randomly, and they interviewed each other on on different disruptions in their lives and living in Southwest Colorado. And I think it's just a beautiful method of appreciative inquiry that can really help people become best friends almost in 20 minutes. It's a great way to really get to know each other. And then our next set of forums will be on adaptation strategies. How do we adapt to a constantly changing world? But we wanted to start with that personal connection so that people could then build out from there. And we also talked about personal values and then their vision. So stories, then values, vision, and then strategies. So that's one piece. And then another thing, I'm really encouraged that this leadership program I'm participating in, our first class yesterday was all about diversity, equity, inclusion. So I'm grateful that leadership programs are starting with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a great activity that we were led in yesterday, after learning about our social identity markers, white, female, upper middle class, all these different things. Then we practiced doing I am from poems. And I encourage all of you to try it. The first line, or the first part of each line is I am from da da da, I am from da 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 da. And you can have it be really deep and really beautiful. And it's a way to get to know people more than I'm from California, this is my job, da da da. It's here's a couple lines. One of the lines is, I am from avocado orchards and citrus groves. So that gives you a taste of it. But anyways, just encourage you to try those two things. I am from poems and appreciative inquiry. That's it.
Is there someone who would like to volunteer to give a vote of thanks to Cliff today for kicking us off on this really rambunctious and delightful conversation that we've had this last hour?
Cliff, I really appreciate how you kept it light and open. It gave us a lot of room and also a lot of time. I know sometimes the presentations can be a little bit domineering and way too complex, but you kept it open and it gave us a great foundation and a focal point to move into. I thought it was a really excellent presentation. And I as always, I appreciate you, Cliff.
Thank you, David.
So thank you all so much for your listening, for your participation, for all the heart that you have brought to this. We look forward to your participation in the future, and we so thank Cliff for what he started us off with today. Thanks so much.